All right, so when we left off, it was about those finches, right? So Darwin had gone around the world, spent time reading all these books containing ideas that helped him sort of wonder about how to make sense of all these changes that he had seen. You know, in addition to seeing all these different animals, he had also witnessed some geological events like an earthquake that caused the side of a mountain to move up out of the water several feet, and he'd seen all these fossils exposed when the rock came up out of the water. So, you know, really fascinating stuff to him. And then he sort of let that simmer. You know, he came back, worked on the ideas, thought about the ideas, sort of, you know, talked amongst his sort of circle of friends and colleagues about his ideas, but never really published. Now, over time, he had really come up with a really solid argument for the ideas of evolution and his mechanism for evolution. And what he ended up doing was, developing this really well thought out, well thought out explanation for evolution. So here's what he came up with. First, he makes the point that organisms differ from one another, and that some of these differences are due to heritable features. You know, some organisms have these characteristics that they have that they pass on to their offspring. So you see this variation in every population. In addition to that, he folds in Malthus' idea of the struggle for existence. So he says there's competition for these resources. And the point Darwin makes is that because of this variable nature of traits in populations, some organisms are just going to have traits that help them survive at higher rates than other organisms. And then over time, populations are going to become better adapted to their environments because more of these successful organisms are going to be leaving their offspring. So really, again, on its face, it's a fairly solid idea, although it was revolutionary at the time. Now, Darwin hadn't published anything significant up to that point, but he had gotten a letter from Alfred Wallace here, who independently had come up with a similar mechanism for evolution. And there was a brief back and forth, and Darwin quickly decided to pull together his manuscript, and Wallace, this is sort of, just miraculous to me. No, miraculous probably isn't the term, but, showing quite a bit of grace. Wallace had said that since Darwin had obviously come up with the idea first and had such a well-developed argument, that Darwin should be the first to publish. So now, everybody talks about Darwin, but the contributions of both men are significant. All right. Now, seems like we missed something here. Let's focus in on this. So here's the big idea in The Origin of Species. Darwin does go back to the origin. He said all life has this common ancestor, and because the earth has changed over time, so is life. He called it descent with modification. Now, Darwin's point is that given Earth's long history and the changes that have occurred, for organisms and populations to be adapted to their changing world, populations are going to have to change as well. And Darwin had said that this mechanism is what he called natural selection. Nature selects what organisms are going to be more likely to survive in this changing world. So he called it this tree of life, explaining how life came from this one common ancestor and changed over time to see the diverse branches that are in existence today. Some branches die out, others continue on and branch further, and that sort of leads us to the different forms of life that we see today. It explains the fossils that were found. It helps explain some of the features that are shared by organisms. So it really tied together a lot of loose ends. Now, if you're going to give focus to anything on your notes, I think these images up here, or these notes up here about observations and inferences, and then some of the big ideas from his book are certainly valuable. All right, now let's go on to how natural selection works. Okay, a series of steps that again sort of make sense. First of all, you got a lot of organisms that are born. But again, the world's resources are limited, so not everyone's going to survive to reproductive age. Now, given the fact that there are so many different types of organisms or within a population, or such variability for traits within a population, it's reasonable that because of the competition for these limited resources, some organisms are going to have greater success than others. And it's these successful organisms that are able to pass on their genes to offspring. Now, Darwin referred to this as fitness. Fitness is not talking about your 40-yard dash time. In this instance, fitness is talking about the ability to survive and reproduce. So high evolutionary fitness for Darwin means the organism can survive in a particular environment and then pass on its traits to its offspring, or what we know of as genes. An organism that is big and strong and bad but doesn't pass on its genes has no evolutionary fitness. So if this occurs repeatedly, over time, populations will become more and more adapted or well adapted to their environment. So you see these different species of mantises or mantids that have adapted to life in different environments. So while they may have shared an ancestor, over time mutations have accumulated, increasing variation, and then certain members of the population survive and then begin to shape the population. All right, let's get at some of the support for evolution. Now, artificial selection makes sense. It sort of provides a means of understanding how natural selection might work. Darwin's point was that people have been artificially selecting organisms for centuries, from the various breeds of dog that are created to some of the different types of foods we eat, or many different types of foods we eat. Over time, people have selected what organisms reproduce, and that can lead to significant changes in the types of populations that are created. So Darwin says that if people can, in relatively short amounts of time, have such significant changes in populations of plants and animals over the course of millions, potentially billions of years, couldn't nature have the same influence? So a pretty strong argument. Also, he looked at these ideas of the finches having come from the mainland of South America. Peter and Rosemary Grant, back in the late 70s, had done work over a number of years tracking a couple of different species of finch on some islands. And what they had found is that following periods of drought or little rainfall, the birds or the bird population changed. In times when there was less rain and therefore fewer seeds, the seeds that were most commonly left were seeds that were tougher, had harder shells to crack. So over time, the populations would change so that the birds that had the deeper beaks or the thicker beaks were able to crack the harder shells, and they survived at higher rates. So periods of drought, the population would change. We also see changes occur in population with the use of pesticides. You can look at DDT resistance, in this case in mosquitoes. Oops, excuse me. So DDT resistance occurs in insect populations, so that over time you have to use more and more different pesticides to try and get rid of insects. We also see this resistance in bacteria and viruses. When you go in and get an antibiotic from a doctor, the doctor says, take all the antibiotic even if you start to feel better, because you want to make sure to kill all the bacteria in the population. You don't want to give bacteria a chance to have a mutation occur in one of those plasmids that makes them antibiotic resistant and then pass those on to other bacteria, because then it can lead to more significant infections. It's the same with certain antiretroviral drugs in HIV. They look at the example here. The virus, since it has no mechanisms for gene repair, viruses can accumulate mutations fairly quickly. So over time, viruses can mutate in such a way that they're no longer affected by certain medications. And again, you go back to the flu virus, that mutates so rapidly, we have to get new vaccinations every year. Let's see. We can also see relationships to other organisms in the fossil record. Now, Tiktaalik is an awesome example. This is found, I think, inside the Arctic Circle in northern Canada. It was just 4 or 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. So they found this species of fish. So, it has the body of a fish with the fins and the gills and scales, but it had these eyes located on the top of the head, and it had a limb structure related to tetrapods, or four-legged land animals. So this is what's called a transitional species. We see a species that obviously lived in the water, but could spend time out of the water. So sort of a fascinating way to track the progression. So they've maybe found about 10 of these, or portions of 10 of these. Let's see, looking at homologies. Now, homos means the same, so homologous structures have the same basic architecture. So it comes from the same embryological tissue, the same basic architecture, but they've been adapted for different purposes. So if you look at the forelimbs of these various animals here, we see that the bone structure's strikingly similar, but again, they've been adapted in diverse ways, whether it's the flipper of a dolphin or the wing of a bat. Vestigial structures. A vestige is a remnant of the past. So vestigial structures are structures that were once useful in an ancestor species, but have accumulated mutations through disuse. It's not been selected against, but mutations have accrued over time, and the structures don't really function in the way they used to. For example, cetaceans, or waterborne mammals like whales and dolphins, certain species of whales can have these little vestigial hind limbs and remnants of a pelvis. Again, evidence of their history as their evolutionary history as evolving from tetrapods or land animals. It's the same with certain species of snakes. Again, remnants of pelvis and hind limbs, again indicating that the ancestors to many modern species of snakes were four-legged. We don't only see gross anatomical similarities, we also see similarities in gene sequences, amino acid sequences, and chromosomes. Human and chimpanzee chromosomes are strikingly similar, the one difference being chimps have an extra chromosome, and what we found is that chimps' extra chromosomes at some point in history fused together so that humans have a second chromosome that is significantly longer, made from these two shorter chimp chromosomes. So our DNA, in the form of chromosomes in particular, are significantly or strikingly similar. Let's see. Also, given the fact that us as humans, we share genes with everything on Earth. Every living organism has some amount of genes in common. Even bacteria, we have genes similar to those found in bacteria. Let's see. Now, another way to look at the evolution of life is through convergent evolution. The idea is distantly related species sort of converge on the same resolution or adaptation independent of one another. So, sharks evolved from other fish, ichthyosaurs evolved from reptiles, and dolphins evolved from a land mammal. So here, 3 organisms that have fins and flippers and swim and do all kinds of great stuff, but they evolved those features independently of one another. It's the same with flying squirrels. The sugar glider is a marsupial that lives in Australia, but we have these placental flying squirrels in other parts of the world that, again, evolved independent of one another. So they basically came to the same conclusion or same adaptation. It's just that they arose through different routes or different means. Let's see. Last thing we'll look at here is biogeography. It's location matters in terms of understanding the features of organisms and their relationships. So you can look at the geographic distribution of animals. With Pangea, we had all these primate species interconnected with one another, but when South America broke free from Africa, you had New World monkeys with longer prehensile tails, shorter opposable thumbs, smaller brains, evolved independently of the Old World monkeys, which also gave rise to the great apes with shorter tails, more well-developed hands, larger brains, features of that nature. We also look at endemic species. If populations are separated from